Raids have always been a pillar of the World of Warcraft experience, and with that, they still play a large role in retail WoW's content offering. Modern WoW's seasonal content cadence puts raids front and center, meaning for players of a wide range of differing skill levels to interact with them. Today's video is focused on what raids do well and not so well, with the underlying goal of making suggestions that push raids towards being more fun in the future. Welcome back to TinyBlueGames. My name is, of course, Csaw or Chris, and today we're talking about raids in World of Warcraft. Now, before we get into the good and the bad about raids, I should give you a bit of a summary of my kind of viewpoint for raids, because I think that shapes our opinions of the content that we play. First and foremost, I joined WoW back in Wrath of the Lich King, near the end of it. I played all the way to the end of Cataclysm, and then I took a break until the launch of BFA. From the launch of BFA, I've been somewhat active in the WoW community, and have continuously been playing WoW throughout Dragonflight, Shadowlands. I screwed up the order of those. Shadowlands, Dragonflight, and The War Within. So I've been playing the most recent raids a lot, but I do have experience from some of those past raids. The other part here is that I am what I would classify as kind of the upper end of casual play or the lower end of hardcore. Typically in a WoW season, me and my friend group will reach either, an IO of 2,000 or 2,500 in Mythic Plus, and we would typically clear the final heroic raid boss or up to the final heroic raid boss, which I think is right at that kind of cutoff of where you would start to be more hardcore versus not. Obviously, everyone has their own opinions on that. The other part of this is that I have a friend group of 4 other people, so 5 people total, which is great for Mythic Plus, but raids we typically kind of run pugs and have just the 5 of us leading a pug group through this to get all the way to the end of heroic, which will shape our experience versus being in a guild or something like that. All that said, though, let's get into the good and the bad. I'm going to start this with a bunch of good things about the current iteration of raids in WoW. I do think a lot of good things have happened to raids over time, and more than anything, I know that a lot of people are developing World of Warcraft and put a lot of effort into making the game as good as it can be, and as I go through the second portion of this video, which highlights some of the more negative parts of raids, I'm going to be maybe severe, maybe very to the point, and this should give you a nice positive blanket to kind of hold over you while we go through that troubling area. So without further ado, let's talk about all of the good that is in raids. Raids feel like a meaty part of the seasonal patches. There's an expected cadence that is delivered upon nowadays. You know when raids are going to come out, and Blizzard is meeting that expectation. They offer the highest coordinated challenge in any MMO, and possibly any MMO, like any game in general, really, when you think about getting that many people together to do kind of the difficulty level of a end mythic boss, which is crazy to think about. This has led to the Race to World First being a massive esports event that happens regularly. Esports has always been this thing that kind of has died in a lot of different areas of gaming, but the Race to World First has become more exciting over time, I think, to a lot of the viewers of it, which is really good for the game and obviously good for raiders who participate in it. There is a ton of difficulty levels offering different entry points to a variety of players. This is a big change relative to how raids worked back in the day. I'd say, really any skill level of player can get into raids at this point, even if it just means completing the LFR. And then obviously the highest end and the most difficult content in the game is also in raids. So there's a massive amount of difficulty levels that are being captured in raids. And this is pretty much for any raid that's released, which is really exciting to see. The raids themselves have the story woven into them, which makes them feel more epic. This is, again, tied to the fact that they are so accessible at a low level. I think Blizzard has no fear putting huge story beats in their raids, which in turn makes them feel more epic. In contrast, I know Guild Wars 2 often had a lot of their raids and more epic fights focus on side stories because they were concerned that some players wouldn't be able to interact with them, and they didn't want their main story beats to be captured in this content that was too hard for certain players to do, which they've themselves have been making improvements about that, but it was a really nice thing that Blizzard done very well. Mechanics are typically awesome. I think some of the most creative fights I've ever engaged with in any MMO have happened in World of Warcraft. They managed to make large raids with 8 to 10 bosses, and most of the bosses feel quite distinct from each other and often quite distinct from season to season, which is probably pretty hard to do. And then lastly, there is more flexibility in raid size, allowing for easier forming. This is below mythic level, but you're able to, have normal heroic raids that can kind of scale all the way down from 10 players up to 25 or 30 players. I think it's up to 30. We never go that big, but you don't really have to super worry about hitting exactly 10 or exactly 25 anymore, which is nice. It kind of scales between it, which again is a really nice change that happened relative to back when I was playing in Wrath, and you absolutely needed to get that final player, or you couldn't have a person come in to fill the last spot with their buddy. It just couldn't happen, right? So awesome stuff there. Lots of good things that have happened. The other part of this is the history of raids, right? Raids have been a part of WoW since the game released, kind of as we're touching on in the intro. And because of this, I feel like there's a lot of legacy mechanics that are tied in how they work, and kind of legacy mechanics that the developers are afraid to get rid of. There's also a lot of experimentation that has happened with raids over this time. Obviously, we've talked about the size of raids and stuff like that. A lot of the second portion of this video will talk about loot, but we've seen many iterations in terms of how loot is handled, from token systems, from personal loot versus need versus greed versus master loot. There's been a lot of experimentation, which overall I think is a positive that Blizzard has been willing to change things up, but we'll talk about where things currently are and where they could be improved in just a second. Lastly, the core point that I want to make in a lot of these videos, especially if this one proves to be pretty successful, is the existence of Classic WoW. Classic WoW has been alive and kicking for quite a long time now, and I don't think there's any fears that it's going to go away anytime in the future here. And what this does for the developers, or at least what I think this should do for WoW, is whenever they're looking at some of these legacy mechanics that they've kind of been dragging along in any portion of the game, but specifically for this video in raids, know that there is a different offering of World of Warcraft that players can go back to if they want to play the game as they used to. And what that means is that the retail WoW experience should primarily be focused on being the best game that it can be in 2025 versus satisfying people that could go and achieve the same feeling or legacy mechanic in Classic WoW. There is a place for that. They no longer have to be scared to cater to kind of the old school playstyle, the new school playstyle in one game mode. They have the different game modes, and they really should start focusing on pushing the retail experience to be the most modern, vibrant, best version of the game that it can be in 2025. That said, there are certainly things that are just flat out more enjoyable in Classic versus retail currently. And if something was in the game in Classic, it should not be excluded from being added back to the retail just because it's seen as old. If something was done in a better way back in the day, it can be added back to the game again. It shouldn't be something like, oh, we ditched that a while ago. It'd be chaos to bring it back. No, if it was better, bring it back. So there we go. I think that's all of the housekeeping stuff. Hopefully we've got a good set of what we're gonna, talk about here, and we've got some positive things to look back on as we go deeper into the more negative section of this video. So let's buckle up. So what's bad in raids? The rewards. WoW is such a reward-based game, and the rewards in raids kinda suck unless you clear mythic difficulty, and even with that, the rewards are super RNG focused. I mean, if you need supporting evidence for this, Blizzard, just look in your heart, by which I mean the game analytics, and I'm sure it'll tell you that a lot of people are not playing the anniversary raid, or at least not as many as you would have expected. Are there other challenges with the anniversary raid? Yes, of course, but the rewards are simply not what people desire, and because of that, they are not giving it the time it deserves. I think rewards and raiding, rewards in any part of any MMORPG are so hand in hand that they need to be one of the top points that we discuss here. I can raid for hours and get no loot while others around me are showered in it with it in this current system that we have. And don't get me wrong, this is still better than the personal loot where I could raid for hours and not even roll on anything that we had a couple expansions ago. The biggest issue with this is that there was a good system that made your time feel valued back in Wrath, where you would get tokens to eventually purchase your gear from raids. Was this code simply misplaced, or did someone think it was more fun to have a chance to walk away with nothing? What if there was a vendor that sold items from the raids with tabs for each of the difficulties, and you could purchase items that drop from each boss only after you killed it? So, you still couldn't save up for items from kind of the end of raid bosses until you've actually cleared them, but at least there was a way to save up for them if you never got lucky enough to get a certain trinket that you might have wanted for the entire season. So you still need to unlock these to purchase them, which is great. More to that, you can still have bosses drop gear based on RNG. Players get lucky and get their piece without having to save for the currency. If they don't get lucky, they save up for tokens, encouraging them to engage with previous bosses and lower difficulty to get rewards through slow and steady methods. Higher difficulty bosses should drop more tokens so that the most efficient farm isn't going back to the lowest difficulty bosses, but that's something that can be finessed over time. The main point here is have a system that is always rewarding players so they always want to jump into the raid, have it so that they can still get lucky and get the piece of gear without having to save up. But if they don't get lucky, they don't walk away crying with nothing in their hands wondering why they should show up to raid. You could even go crazy and encourage learning more by having bosses drop a small amount of currency, if it's tokens or whatever currency it is, from attempts on the boss alone. Let me explain this because this is a little bit more complex, and it's something that I absolutely adored in Guild Wars 2 raids. Essentially, if you were pulling a boss that you had not killed for the week, and you managed to get that boss to 70%, you would get a handful of tokens after you wiped. If you progressed that boss even further and you got to 30%, you would get even more tokens, and then obviously killing the boss would reward the most tokens, and you would also get a chance at the loot. So not only are we incentivizing people to play raids if they're killing bosses, but we're also incentivizing those groups that form and just pound their head against the boss for hours and don't get a single thing. Now they are at least getting some currency from it, which means, hey, let's go back and pound our head against it next week as well. With this, there should obviously be an expanding currency cap to ensure that wiping on bosses to get tokens isn't the most efficient way to farm them, i.e. you can get, more from killing the boss that's actually available versus, just wiping against one boss. But again, this is something that can be finessed on Blizzard's side. I'm trying to present conceptual ideas versus the actual mathematical ways to make them not abusable, which, let's be honest, people will always try and find a way to do. The second point here, we've talked about rewards, let's talk about wipes and making them suck less. No moment makes me question my subscription to WoW more than when I wait for 30 minutes to form a group for a boss to do one pull and then literally have 90% of the group leave. Nothing makes me question my reasons for playing this game more than in that moment after that happens. Are some levers unavoidable? Yes. Could the amount of levers be improved by getting people right into the next pull without additional pain? I think for sure they could. Use a surrender, vote, or /GG system to kill all remaining players during failed attempts. Nothing is more painful than it taking a few minutes for a failed attempt to actually have everyone die. I'm sure we've all been there where we're in a pug and, a core mechanic is not done, and if you're a seasoned player to that fight, it's not going to happen, so you walk off the edge and just wait for the reset, just to have, a handful of players walk around or still healing each other, trying to do this fight and just prolonging the inevitable. It would be so nice to have a way for you to just quickly be done with that boss and back into the next pull instead of having it take so long. I think the amount of times I have a failed attempt that drags out like that and then have so many people leave afterwards, it can't be a coincidence. I think, it's the final straw for a lot of people when that happens. For those of you who have not played Guild Wars 2, and apparently just my theme here is going to be talking about Guild Wars 2, but a side conversation to that, I think it's great to take inspiration from other MMOs that have good ideas. Let's be honest, dragon riding probably came from somewhere. And let's also be honest, how many of these, MMOs probably took inspiration from World of Warcraft systems. I think it's a great way to do game development. That aside, in Guild Wars 2, you can type /GG to wipe yourself during an encounter. But WoW could use a similar system maybe to the ready check, where if 50% of the voters say yes, then the group wipes. I think that's a really handy way to have it kind of be a democracy type thing, where, if there's several people that are down, the leader can kind of start up a surrender ready check style thing, and then if 50% say yes, the boss goes away, everyone dies and resets. I think that would be a great system. Once the group has wiped, everyone spawns in front of the boss platform where there is always an anvil waiting. I know, shocking to say. No runbacks, more pulls. Because let's be honest, what's more fun, the runback or the pull? In the current iteration of the game, that is actually a valid question because it's being designed to have both. If one of those is more obviously fun, it should be what's focused on in this game that exists in 2025 that still has a classic version for people who want to run back. I don't know who runbacks are fun for, but you can afford to lose them as retail subscribers if they don't like this change. I don't think it's going to be enough that it's going to matter. I really don't. The wipe is punishment enough. There is nothing additional needed after that. The wipe is the punishment. That's all right. Let's move on. Forming groups is terrifying and or not fun. The current LFG system is actually very nice compared to almost every other MMO I play. If we could make it so that it doesn't kick your group out randomly sometimes, that would make it also a million times better. What I mean by this is sometimes you'll list your group and have people join, and then for no reason at all, your group posting will disappear. And it's a well-known thing that happens. Everyone's like, oh, the posting disappeared. If it's well-known, how has it been an issue in the game for like many seasons at this point? If it's well-known, it should just be fixed. Players should be further incentivized to run their own pug groups. Perhaps you could provide leaders with gold rewards for taking on the responsibility of leading. Maybe the gold reward exponentially increases for each subsequent boss that's killed. So, you have a lot of incentive to put your neck out there and start a pug and actually stick with the pug, because each boss you kill further gives that reward, right? So you're not only just making a pug really quickly, but you're also wanting to stay there and fill it for the next bosses. I think that would be super good to get people doing that. And just gives them more reason to want to try that if they've never tried leading before. Have summoning stones in front of each boss. Similar to the anvils, whatever the setup is that's in front of each boss, just have a summoning stone there. The pain of not having a warlock in your group when you are filling mid-raid is undescribable. I literally wrote that in the script here. I wrote, could not be described in words how much pain there is when you have to run back out. It's come to the point where my group of 5 players, again, myself included, we almost always have to have a warlock in our group just so that we can raid, because it's so painful if you don't have a warlock in them. People who care about class fantasy can play classic, or they could cosplay as a warlock and offer to summon people on the street near their houses. There's no need for it to be this thing that has to be a legacy thing of WoW raids to summon people in with a warlock. It doesn't have to happen. The game can just be fun. Okay, let's move to the next. Why is the difficulty jump of other heroic bosses to the heroic last boss so crazy? This applies to other large jumps in difficulty as well. I think it would be much more enjoyable in terms of learning curve if everything just got gradually more difficult after the, last boss was killed. Why is leading a mythic raid trapped behind killing the last boss on heroic, but heroic not trapped behind killing the last boss on normal? Why is that the case? Why would you have it one way but not the other? Also, don't go and trap heroic behind doing the last boss on normal now. Make the change to give players more freedom. If I want to lead a raid on mythic difficulty and get absolutely shreked without killing the heroic last boss first, let me do it. Especially if you implement the previous change of having some tokens or currency rewarded for attempts. I think it's fun to challenge people and not have them feel like things are locked behind something arbitrarily, especially if it's just, because of tradition. Change things like this to make them more free for players to do. Add shorter raids again, like 1 and 2 boss raids, bosses in the box, whatever you want to call them. Now, I don't think a full tier or season would be satisfied with just having a 1 or 2 boss raid, but having, a traditional long raid at the start of a release of a season and then having a subsequent small raid added could be a really fun thing. I do look fondly back at Cataclysm, where we had a launch that had several short raids at the same time, and this could be fun to see what the Race to World First would do with it, but I think, in terms of the race, I think it's just better to have, one standard raid at the start of a season that's kind of that traditional 8 to 11 bosses, but I do think looking at a single raid boss, midway through a season, or a 2 raid boss midway through the season would be great. There's kind of this, midway point through a season where we do see people start to drop off naturally. If we can't shorten the seasons to reduce this drop-off point, let's look at adding additional small raids to make it more engaging for people. Shorter raids are fun because you can feel like you actually finished a run without having to dedicate many hours or several nights to clearing the whole raid. They can help tell transitional stories between seasons as well, which could be really fun, especially if they are always kind of released at the end or mid of a season. You could start forming these big stories to the next season's, main story. You could even add the same loot from the original raid for those 2 bosses to help players get exceptionally, valuable items, provide additional tokens if previous, suggestions are accepted. For instance, in this current season, if a 1 or 2 boss raid were added midway through the season, it would make a lot of sense for it to have an additional source of the Spymaster trinket. If someone is, really trying to get this trinket, now they have 2 different bosses that they can farm weekly to try and get the trinket, which I think pretty much anyone who wants that trinket would be very happy with. Pretty much anyone who's just fiddling around waiting for the next season would be happy to have more bosses to do. It's kind of a win-win. It's just, I guess on this end, it is additional content. So if it's something Blizzard can do, I think that would be great. I think it would be worth doing this even opposed, if it took every raid that was going to be 11 bosses and brought it down to 9 bosses at the start of the season and had a 2 boss raid midway through the season, I think that would be a great change overall. And there you have it. Again, all of this is about making the game better, period. It's not about attacking anyone. There's a ton of positives that I included at the start of this video, but those are my ways you could make raids more fun, or at least some of the parts that I don't enjoy. And that's the end of my rant. I'm sure either way, I forgot, to include stuff that people will think should be included in this list, or people will think that, I've been completely wrong in what I've stated here. Feel free roasting me in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.